The first rays of sunlight painted the African sky in shades of orange and gold. In the small village of Adansi, smoke was already rising from one particular hut. Inside, a man named Kofi was lighting his forge for another day of work. Kofi had been the village blacksmith for over 20 years. His father taught him the trade, and his grandfather before that. The knowledge passed down through generations lived in his strong hands and keen eyes. He could tell just by looking at a piece of metal what it needed to become something useful. The forge stood in the center of his workshop, built from stones his own hands had carefully placed. The bellows beside it were worn smooth from years of use. Tools hung on every wall, hammers of different sizes, tongs for holding hot metal, and files for smoothing rough edges. Everything had its place and everything was kept clean and sharp. Kofi lived in a special spot. His village sat right where the territories of 7 different tribes met. Travelers from all directions stopped here to trade, rest, and repair their belongings. Over the years, he had worked with metal from every tribe, learned their different styles, and earned their respect. The morning started like any other. A farmer brought a broken plow blade. Kofi heated it red hot and hammered it back into shape. A woman came with a cooking pot that had cracked. He welded the crack so perfectly that it looked like new. Each job was different, but Kofi treated them all with the same care. Around midday, when the sun was getting hot, a shadow fell across his doorway. Kofi looked up from his work to see a tall man standing there. This wasn't someone from the village. The stranger wore clothes that marked him as Ashanti, one of the more distant tribes. Dust covered his sandals and legs, showing he had traveled far, but what really caught Kofi's attention was the broken spear in the man's hands. The weapon was clearly special. The wooden shaft was carved with intricate patterns that told stories. Symbols were burned into the wood, each one carrying meaning that went back generations. The metal spearhead gleamed even in its damaged state, showing the quality of its original crafting. The problem was obvious. The spear had snapped about a foot below the metal point. It looked like it had taken a tremendous impact, probably during battle. The break was clean but complete. Without repair, this beautiful weapon was useless. The warrior stepped into the workshop, moving with the careful dignity of someone used to respect. His eyes held both pride and worry. Kofi could see this wasn't just any soldier. The way he carried himself, the quality of his clothes, and especially the craftsmanship of the broken spear all pointed to high rank. "Master Blacksmith," the warrior sighed, his voice deep and respectful, "I need your help." Kofi set down his current work and gave the stranger his full attention. This was how his father had taught him to treat every customer. Whether they were buying a simple nail or commissioning a ceremonial sword, the warrior held up the broken spear. "This belonged to my grandfather and his grandfather before him. It has been in my family for 7 generations. Yesterday, it broke during a battle to protect my village from raiders." As he spoke, Kofi could hear the pain in his voice. This wasn't just about a broken tool. This spear represented family honor, ancestral connection, and personal identity, all wrapped into one object. "I have heard stories of your skill from other warriors," the man continued. "They say you can fix anything and that you understand the spirit that lives in metal." Kofi nodded slowly. He took the broken pieces and examined them carefully. The wood was aged but still strong. The metal joint where the spear had attached was complex, showing master-level craftsmanship from whoever had made it originally. The break itself was challenging but not impossible to repair. "This is beautiful work," Kofi said honestly. "Your ancestors chose their craftsmen well." The warrior's face brightened at the compliment. Then it darkened again as he reached into his pouch. "Master Blacksmith, I must be honest with you. The raiders took everything. I have no gold to pay for this repair. All I can offer is my word that someday, somehow, I will repay your kindness." Many craftsmen would have turned him away at this point. Business was business after all. But Kofi looked at the warrior's face and saw something that reminded him of his own father, pride mixed with desperation, honor struggling with necessity. "Sit in the shade," Kofi said. pointing to a bench under the large tree beside his workshop. "Let me get you some water while I think about this." The warrior's eyes widened with surprise. He had expected to be refused, probably politely but firmly. Instead, the stranger was offering hospitality. Kofi brought a gourd of cool water and watched as the tired traveler drank deeply. While the warrior rested, Kofi examined the spear more closely. The metalwork was exceptional, but more than that, he could see the care that had gone into maintaining it over the decades. This weapon had been loved, respected, and properly cared for by every generation that owned it. "Tell me about the battle," Kofi said. The warrior's voice took on the rhythm of a born storyteller. He described how raiders had come in the night, trying to steal cattle and kidnap children, how he and the other village defenders had fought them off, but at great cost. His spear had broken when he struck the final blow that sent the remaining raiders running. "My grandfather always said this spear would never fail in a righteous fight," the warrior said sadly. "I thought I had dishonored it somehow." Kofi shook his head firmly. "Metal breaks. That's what metal does when it's pushed hard enough. But look here," he pointed to the break. "See how clean this is? Your spear didn't fail you. It gave everything it had right up to the moment it couldn't give anymore. That's what honor looks like in metal." The warrior stared at him, clearly not expecting such wisdom from a village blacksmith. "Besides," Kofi continued with a small smile, "metal that breaks cleanly like this is easier to fix than metal that bends or cracks. Your ancestors built this spear to be repaired when needed. They knew someday it might break, and they planned for it." Without another word about payment, Kofi carried the broken spear to his forge. The warrior started to speak, probably to again explain his lack of money, but Kofi held up a hand. "My father taught me that honor isn't something you buy or sell," Kofi said. "It's something you do. Today, my honor means helping a warrior who fought to protect children. Tomorrow, your honor will mean remembering this kindness and passing it on to someone else who needs help." The warrior fell silent, but Kofi could see tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. Kofi began by examining every inch of both pieces. He tested the wood for hidden cracks, checked the metal for stress points, and studied the original joint work to understand how the first craftsman had attached the spearhead. This was going to be more than a simple repair to make the spear strong enough for battle again. Kofi would need to use some of his finest materials. Silver wire that he had been saving for his daughter's wedding jewelry. A small piece of iron that had been in his family for generations, passed down as a good luck charm. But looking at the grateful warrior sitting in his shade, Kofi knew he was making the right choice. Some things were more important than money. Some moments defined who you really were. He lit his forge a little hotter and began to work. The fire in Kofi's forge roared to life as he worked the bellows with steady rhythm. Orange flames danced higher and higher, reaching the exact temperature he needed. After 20 years of blacksmithing, he could judge heat by the color of the flames and the feel of warmth on his face. The warrior watched from his shaded bench, fascinated by the precision of every movement. Kofi wasn't just heating metal randomly. He was conducting an orchestra of fire, air, and iron. "The secret," Kofi said as he worked, "is patience. Young smiths always want to rush. They heat too fast, hammer too hard, cool too quick. But metal has its own timing. You have to listen to what it's telling you." He carefully placed the broken pieces into the coals, positioning them so the heat would spread evenly. The wooden shaft needed to be protected while the metal joint got hot enough to work with. Years of experience had taught him exactly how to manage both materials at once. While the metal heated, Kofi gathered his tools. Not his everyday hammers and tongs, but the special ones his grandfather had made. These tools had shaped countless weapons and farm implements. They had helped feed families and defend villages. Today, they would restore honor to a warrior's family heirloom. "Tell me about your grandfather," Kofi said as he waited for the right temperature. "The one who first carried this spear?" The warrior's face lit up. He was a great hunter and protector. Stories say he once tracked a leopard for 3 days to save a child it had taken. When he found the leopard's den, he used this very spear to defeat the beast and bring the child home safely. Kofi nodded approvingly. Good, the spear remembers the courage. It knows what it was made for. The warrior looked puzzled. You really believe weapons have memory? Everything remembers, Kofi replied, testing the heat with a quick touch of his tongs. Wood remembers the tree it came from. Metal remembers the earth it was dug from. And weapons remember every brave deed they've been part of. That's why I can never fix a weapon used for evil. It fights me every step of the way. The metal was ready. Kofi lifted the spearhead with his tongs, studying the breakpoint in the firelight. The original craftsman had done excellent work. The joint was complex, designed not just for strength but for balance. Repairing it properly would require recreating that same balance. Watch carefully, he told the warrior. I'm going to show you something most people never see. Kofi reached into a special pouch and pulled out silver wire so fine it looked like hair. This wasn't ordinary silver. His own grandfather had traded a month's work for this precious metal, saving it for something truly important. This silver came from the mountains far to the north, Kofi explained as he began wrapping the wire around the breakpoint. It's stronger than most people think, and it bonds to iron in a way that makes both metals better. The warrior leaned forward, amazed. You're using silver? But that must be worth more than my entire village earns in a season. Kofi smiled as he worked the silver into place with delicate precision. My daughter was supposed to wear this as jewelry at her wedding, but she'd be proud to know it saved the family's honor instead. Some things are more valuable than their price. Next came the real test. Kofi had to heat the joint enough to fuse the metals together, but not so hot that he damaged the intricate carvings on the wooden shaft. He moved the spear in and out of the flames with careful timing, letting the heat build gradually. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the afternoon breeze. This kind of precision work required total concentration. One moment of carelessness could destroy 7 generations of family history. My father used to say that a true craftsman puts a piece of his soul into every job, Kofi murmured as he worked. Not because he has to, but because he can't help it. When you love your work, you give it everything. The silver began to glow and flow, bonding with the iron in ways that would make the joint stronger than it had ever been. But Kofi wasn't finished. He reached for another special material, a small piece of iron that had been blessed by the village elder decades ago. This iron has been in my family since my great-grandfather's time, he said, carefully filing tiny shavings into the joint. They say it brings good fortune to any weapon it becomes part of. The warrior was speechless. He had come begging for a simple repair, offering nothing in return. Instead, he was watching this generous man pour his family's treasures into restoring a stranger's weapon. Hour by hour, Kofi worked with the patience of someone who understood that excellence couldn't be rushed. He hammered, shaped, heated, and cooled the metal with rhythmic precision. Each strike of his hammer was measured and purposeful. The rhythm is important too, he explained during one of his brief rests. Metal responds to music. My grandfather taught me that every repair has its own song. You have to find the right beat and stay with it. As if to demonstrate, Kofi began tapping his hammer in a steady pattern against the spearhead. Ring, ring, pause, ring, ring, pause. The warrior found himself swaying slightly to the hypnotic sound. In the old days, the village smiths would all work together during big projects, Kofi continued. 20 hammers ringing in harmony, creating tools and weapons that would last generations. People would come from miles away just to hear the music of the forges. The afternoon sun moved across the sky as Kofi worked, but time seemed to stand still in the little workshop. The warrior watched every movement, learning not just about metalworking but about dedication, patience, and pride in craft. You see how the metal changes color as it cools. Kofi pointed to the spearhead, which was shifting from red to orange to gold. That tells me about the strength. Too fast, and it becomes brittle. Too slow, and it stays soft. Getting it just right, that's where the magic happens. Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, Kofi made his last adjustments. He tested the balance, checked the straightness, and examined every inch of his work under different angles of light. The transformation was remarkable. Not only was the spear repaired, but it looked more magnificent than before. The silver work caught the light in beautiful patterns. The balance was perfect, maybe even better than the original. What had been broken was now whole, and what had been whole was now improved. Kofi held up the finished spear, turning it slowly so both he and the warrior could admire the work. The weapon practically glowed in the late afternoon light. "Try it," he said, offering the spear to its owner. The warrior stood and accepted the weapon with reverent hands. He tested its weight, spun it in practiced movements, and made a few careful thrusts at imaginary targets. His eyes grew wide with amazement. "It's perfect," he whispered. "Better than perfect. It feels alive in my hands." Kofi watched with satisfaction. As the warrior moved through a series of traditional spear techniques, every movement flowed naturally. The weapon responded to its wielder like it was part of his own body. "Your grandfather would be proud," Kofi said simply. Tears rolled down the warrior's weathered cheeks as he realized what this stranger had done for him. Not just repaired a weapon, but restored his connection to 7 generations of ancestors. Given him back his identity, his pride, and his family's legacy. The warrior tried to speak several times, but couldn't find words big enough for his gratitude. Finally, he clasped Kofi's shoulders in the traditional gesture of deepest respect. "The 7 winds will carry word of your kindness," he said in his tribal language. "What you have given me today will return to you 7-fold. Then he was gone, disappearing into the growing dusk with his restored spear gleaming in the fading light. Kofi watched until the figure vanished completely, then turned back to bank his forge for the night. He had no idea that his simple act of kindness was about to change everything. That evening, as Kofi cleaned the silver dust from his tools and swept the metal shavings from around his forge, something felt different. The air itself seemed to carry a strange tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm when all the birds stopped singing. He stepped outside his workshop to enjoy the cool evening breeze, and noticed his neighbor Amara hurrying past with her children. She usually stopped to chat about the day's work, but tonight she barely nodded before pushing her little ones toward their hut. "Strange evening," Kofi called out to her. Amara paused and looked back with worried eyes. "Haven't you heard?" "Oh." Quaim saw dust clouds on the eastern horizon, big ones, moving this way. Kofi squinted into the distance where she pointed, but the setting sun made it hard to see anything clearly. Still, now that she mentioned it, he could make out faint brown smudges against the darkening sky. Probably just a herd of cattle being moved to new grazing land, he suggested, though something in his gut told him otherwise. Amara shook her head. "Quaim knows cattle dust from war party dust. He fought in the border conflicts 20 years ago. He says this looks like armed men, lots of them, and they're coming from more than one direction." After she hurried away with her children, Kofi climbed onto his roof to get a better view. From up there, he could see what Amara meant. The dust. Clouds weren't random. They moved with purpose, and they were indeed coming from multiple directions. East, north, southwest, at least 3 different groups, maybe more. As full darkness settled over the village, cooking fires began appearing in the distance. Not the small, scattered fires of herders or traders, but organized camps with the disciplined spacing of military groups. Kofi counted at least 6 separate encampments surrounding the village at various distances. The sound reached him next. Drums, not the happy celebration drums of festivals, but the deep, rhythmic war drums that carried messages between fighting forces. The beats echoed across the savannah from different directions, creating a complex pattern that spoke of coordination and planning. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every hour brought new sounds, the neighing of horses, the clink of weapons. Being prepared, men's voices calling orders in languages from different tribes. Kofi lay on his sleeping mat, listening to his village transform from a peaceful crossroads into the center of something much larger and more dangerous. By dawn, the situation had become crystal clear. Representatives from all 7 major tribes had arrived during the night and established camps around Adansi. From his rooftop, Kofi could see their banners and identify each group dot to the east. The red and gold colors of the Ashanti flew over a camp of at least 200 warriors. North of the village, the blue and white banners of the Fant marked another large encampment. The Ga tribe had set up to the west, their green flags visible among the acacia trees. But it didn't stop there. The Dagomba had claimed the southern approach, their distinctive leather shields glinting in the morning sun. Beyond them, Kofi could make out the feathered spears that marked a Gonga war party. The Montprusi had taken position on a hill to the southwest, and finally, the geometric patterns on shields that could only belong to the Masi completed the circle, 7 tribes, 7 armies. All converged on his little village that had always prided itself on being neutral ground where everyone was welcome. The village elders called an emergency meeting in the shade of the great baobab tree that marked the center of Adansi. Kofi joined the worried crowd of farmers, traders, and craftsmen who had suddenly found themselves trapped in the middle of what looked like the biggest military confrontation in decades. Elder Nana, the oldest person in the village, spoke. First, his voice shook with age and fear. In all my 80 years, I have never seen anything like this. The 7 tribes have sent their war parties here. Our village sits exactly where all their territories meet. And now it seems like they mean to settle their differences with blood. The Baker, raised his hand. What differences? I thought the tribes had been at peace for years. Not peace, corrected Amma, who ran the village market. Just no open war. But the tensions have been building. Water rights, grazing boundaries, trade route disputes, all the old arguments that our fathers thought were settled. Elder Nana nodded grimly. The drought last season made everything worse. When resources get scarce, old enemies remember why they were enemies in the first place. Kofi listened as his neighbors shared what they knew. The Ashanti and Fant had been arguing over who controlled the trade routes to the coast. The northern tribes were fighting over grazing rights as the grasslands became more precious. Ancient boundary disputes that had simmered for generations were now boiling over. But why here? Asked Geneba, the village weaver. Why bring their armies to our doorstep? The answer came from Kojo, a trader who traveled between all the tribal territories. Because Adansi sits right in the middle of everything. Whoever controls this crossroads controls the trade routes, the water sources, and the best grazing land for 100 miles in any direction. A chill ran through the crowd as they realized what this meant. Their village wasn't just witness to a conflict, it was the prize being fought over. Throughout the morning, scouts from each tribe approached the village. They came not to attack, but to deliver formal messages to the elders. The pattern was the same from each group. Leave now, before the fighting starts. We cannot guarantee your safety once the battle begins. The problem was obvious. Where could 200 villagers go? Their whole lives were here, their homes, their businesses, their families' graves. And even if they could leave, 7 armies surrounding them meant no clear escape route. We could try to negotiate, suggested Elder Nana. Send representatives to each camp, remind them that we've always been neutral, always welcomed all tribes equally. But even as he spoke, everyone knew how unlikely that was to work. When warriors traveled this far and made camps this organized, they hadn't come to talk. They had come to fight. The drums continued throughout the day, their messages becoming more frequent and more urgent. Kofi noticed that the different tribal camps were positioning themselves strategically, each group trying to claim the best defensive positions while blocking their enemies' access to water sources. Tension filled the air like smoke from a brush fire. Children were kept close to their parents. Windows were shuttered despite the heat. People spoke in whispers as if loud voices might trigger the explosion everyone could feel coming. As afternoon approached, the first real confrontation occurred. A party of Ga warriors rode too close to the Ashanti camp while watering their horses at the stream. Shouts erupted, weapons were drawn, and for a terrifying moment it looked like the battle would begin right there. Only quick intervention by commanders from both sides prevented bloodshed. But the message was clear. Everyone was on edge, ready to fight at the smallest provocation. "It's like living inside a pot of water that's about to boil over," Amara told Kofi as they watched the near confrontation from the safety of the village center. That evening brought more ominous signs. Signal fires were lit on hilltops in the distance. More drums joined the conversation, their beats carrying messages between the camps and back to the home territories of each tribe. Whatever was happening here was bigger than just a local dispute. The 7 tribes were preparing for something that hadn't happened in generations, a massive, multi-sided war with the potential to reshape the entire region's balance of power. And somehow, Kofi's little village had become ground zero for a conflict that could destroy everything they had built over generations of peaceful coexistence. As he prepared for what might be his last night in his workshop, Kofi couldn't help but think about the warrior whose spear he had repaired just that morning. Had that man known what was coming? Was his broken weapon connected to the forces now gathering around the village? Looking out at the 7 camps surrounding his home, Kofi realized that tomorrow would bring answers to questions he had never wanted to ask. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and with each passing hour, the tension around Adansi grew thicker. By noon, Kofi could see warriors from all 7 camps moving closer to the village, forming loose circles that slowly tightened like a noose. The villagers had gathered in the central square, not knowing what else to do. Children clung to their parents while the adults whispered prayers and tried to look braver than they felt. Elder Nana sat on his carved stool, his weathered hands shaking. As he watched the approaching soldiers, then something changed. From the Ashanti camp came the sound of a single horn, long and deep. All movement stopped. Warriors from every tribe turned to look toward the eastern approach where the red and gold banners flew. A figure emerged from the Ashanti camp, walking with purpose toward the village center. As he got closer, Kofi felt his heart skip a beat. It was the warrior whose spear he had repaired just yesterday. But now everything about the man was different. Gone were the simple travel clothes and humble manner. Instead, the warrior wore the full ceremonial armor of an Ashanti war chief. Golden bands circled his arms and a magnificent headdress of feathers, and shells marked his high rank. Most striking of all was the spear in his hands, Kofi's repair work. Gleaming like captured sunlight in the midday heat, the villagers parted as the war chief walked directly to the center of their gathering. He raised the restored spear high above his head and called out in a voice that carried across the entire area. "Warriors of the 7 tribes? I am Chief Anan of the Ashanti people, and I have something to say that you all need to hear." The effect was immediate. From every camp, commanders and war chiefs began walking toward the village. Some came reluctantly, others with curiosity, but all came. Within minutes, representatives from all 7 tribes stood in a rough circle around the baobab tree. Kofi found himself pushed to the front of the crowd of villagers, close enough to see the intricate silver work he had woven into the spear shaft. The weapon caught every ray of sunlight and seemed to glow with its own inner fire. Chief Anan looked around the circle of war leaders, making eye contact with each one. Then he began to speak, and his words would change everything. "Yesterday, I came to this village as a broken man carrying a broken weapon. My grandfather's spear, carried by 7 generations of my family, had snapped during a battle with raiders. I had no gold, no valuable goods to trade. I was just a warrior with nothing but his word and his need." He held up the spear, turning it slowly so everyone could see the masterful repair work. "The blacksmith of this village could have turned me away. He could have demanded payment up front. He could have done the cheapest, quickest fix possible. Instead, he invited me to sit in his shade, gave me water, and listened to my story. Then he did something I will never forget." Chief Anan's voice grew stronger as he continued. "This man used silver from his own family's treasures to repair my spear, silver that was meant for his daughter's wedding jewelry. He used blessed iron. That had been in his family for generations. He worked for hours with the patience and skill of a master, asking nothing in return except that I remember his kindness and pass it on to others." A murmur ran through the gathered warriors. Several were looking at Kofi with new interest, But Chief Anan wasn't finished. When he handed me back this spear, it wasn't just repaired, it was better than it had ever been. He had given a stranger the very best of his materials, his skill, and his heart. That is the kind of man who lives in this village. That is the kind of place Agansi truly is. One of the other war chiefs stepped forward. Kofi recognized him as Kwaku of the Fant tribe by his distinctive blue and white war paint. "You speak of the blacksmith as if we don't know him," Chief Kwaku said. "But I too have a story about this man and his generous heart." All eyes turned to the Fant chief as he continued. "2 seasons ago, my ceremonial sword broke the night before my father's funeral. It was a disaster. I couldn't honor my father properly without the sword that had been blessed by our ancestral spirits. I rode here in desperation, arriving just as the blacksmith was closing his forge for the day." Chief Kwaku smiled at the memory. Not only did he reopen his workshop, but he worked through the entire night to fix my sword. When morning came, he refused to take payment, saying that helping a son honor his father was payment enough. Because of his kindness, I was able to give my father the farewell he deserved. Now a third voice joined the conversation. Chief Bako of the Ga tribe stepped forward, nodding toward Kofi. "The same blacksmith made tools for my village when locusts destroyed our harvest 3 seasons back. We had nothing to pay him with except our thanks and a promise to remember. He said that was enough. Those tools helped us plant again and survive the hungry months that followed." One by one, the other chiefs began to speak. Each had their own story about Kofi's generosity. Chief Dalala of the Dagamba told how he had repaired her hunting spears when she was still a young warrior, refusing payment because she reminded him of his own daughter. Chief Godwin of the Ganda recalled how the blacksmith had fixed his horse's bridle during a rainstorm, then invited him to shelter in his home until the weather cleared. Chief Nasir of the Momprusi spoke of weapons repaired for ceremonies, tools made for farming, and always the same generous spirit that put human need above personal profit. Finally, Chief Zubair of the Mossi shared how Kofi had once worked for days to create a special ceremonial mask holder, accepting only a meal and a blessing in return. As each story was told, something remarkable happened. The war chiefs began looking at each other differently. These weren't just enemies gathered for battle. They were all people who had been touched by the same man's kindness. Chief Anan raised his spear again to speak. "Brothers and sisters, we came here to fight. Over territory, over water rights, over old grudges that our grandfathers' grandfathers started. But this village, this crossroads where all our territories meet, isn't just a prize to be won. It's the home of people who have shown kindness to all of us equally." The crowd of villagers held their breath as they watched 7 war chiefs representing armies that had been ready to destroy their home stand in thoughtful silence. "What are we really fighting for?" asked Chief Kwaku. "More land, better trade routes? Or are we fighting because we've forgotten how to settle our differences without bloodshed?" Chief Dalala stepped closer to the center of the circle. "My grandmother always said that you could judge a place by how it treated strangers. This village treats strangers like family. That's worth more than all the territory we could conquer. But our people expect us to return with victory," pointed out Chief Godwin. "We can't just go home empty-handed." "Who says we would be going home empty-handed?" Chief Anan asked. "What if instead of conquering this place, we protected it? What if instead of fighting each other, we found a way to share its benefits?" The idea hung in the air like morning mist, fragile but full of possibility. Chief Zubair spoke slowly, considering each word. "You're talking about something that hasn't been tried in living memory. 7 tribes working together instead of competing. Maybe it's time to try something new," Chief Anan replied. "Maybe it's time to honor the lesson this village has taught us about treating others with respect and generosity." As the war chiefs continued their discussion, Kofi stood among his fellow villagers, amazed at how a simple act of kindness had turned a day of certain destruction into something completely unexpected. The broken spear he had repaired was about to mend something much larger than anyone could have imagined. The 7 war chiefs stood in a circle under the great baobab tree, their weapons lowered but their minds racing. Around them, hundreds of warriors from different tribes watched and waited, unsure whether they were about to witness the start of the greatest battle in generations or something entirely different. Chief Anan looked at each of his fellow leaders, then at the villagers who had gathered to watch what they thought would be their final moments. "We have a choice to make," he said quietly. "We can fight as our fathers did and our fathers' fathers. Or we can choose a different path." "What kind of different path?" asked Chief Nasir, though his tone suggested he was genuinely curious rather than dismissive. "A path that honors what we've all learned here," Chief Anan replied. "This village has prospered because it welcomed everyone equally. What if we could create something like that on a larger scale?" Chief Bako frowned thoughtfully. "You're talking about more than just calling off a battle. You're talking about changing everything about how our tribes relate to each other." "Maybe that's exactly what we need," said Chief Dalala. "Our old ways of settling disputes have brought us here, ready to spill blood over the same arguments our grandfathers were having. Has it solved anything? Have any of our tribes become truly prosperous while we've been fighting each other?" The question hung in the air like morning smoke. Everyone knew the answer. Decades of competition and conflict had drained resources, divided families, and prevented the kind of cooperation that could benefit everyone. Chief Kwaku stepped forward. "I've been thinking about what the blacksmith did yesterday. He didn't just fix a spear. He saw a need and filled it, expecting nothing in return. What if that's what leadership really looks like?" "You mean putting others' needs before our own?" Chief Godwin asked. "I mean recognizing that everyone's well-being is connected," Chief Kwaku replied. "When the blacksmith helped each of us, he wasn't choosing sides. He was making the whole region a little bit better." Elder Nana, who had been listening from his seat by the tree, slowly stood up. His old voice carried clearly in the hushed crowd. "In all my 80 years I have seen many wars and many peace treaties. The wars always come back, because peace treaties are just agreements to stop fighting. They don't create reasons to work." Together, the old man looked at each chief in turn. "But what you're talking about now, this is different. This is about choosing to build something new together." Chief Anan nodded slowly. "What would that look like, practically speaking?" "We can't just declare peace and hope everything works out. We could start here," suggested Chief Zubair, gesturing toward the village. "Make Adansi a permanent neutral zone, a place where all tribes can meet safely to trade and resolve disputes." "More than that," added Chief Dalala. "We could use it as an example of how cooperation works. Pool our resources, share our knowledge, create something that benefits everyone." The idea was taking shape, but it was also unprecedented. Nothing like it had ever been attempted in the region's known history. Chief Bako raised a practical concern. "Our people won't understand this at first. They've been preparing for war, not cooperation. How do we explain to warriors that they're going home as allies instead of conquerors?" "We show them the benefits," Chief Anan replied. "Instead of fighting over water rights, we work together to dig deeper wells. Instead of competing for trade routes, we create better ones that serve everyone. Instead of raiding each other's cattle, we share grazing lands and breeding stock." The more they talked, the more excited the chiefs became about the possibilities. Chief Kwaku pointed out that their tribes had different strengths. The Ashanti were skilled metal workers, the Fant controlled coastal trade, the Ga had the best farmers, and so on. Combined, they could create prosperity that none could achieve alone, but it was Chief Anan who proposed the most symbolic gesture. "I think we should commission the blacksmith to create something that represents this new alliance. 7 spears, each incorporating metal from all 7 of our territories as symbols of our unity." The other chiefs immediately understood the power of this idea. Weapons that contained elements from every tribe, crafted by the man whose kindness had brought them together, would be perfect symbols of their new relationship. Kofi, who had been standing quietly among the villagers, suddenly found all 14 eyes looking directly at him. The war chiefs were waiting for his response to their unprecedented request. "Honored chiefs," Kofi said, his voice steady despite his amazement, "I would be deeply honored to create such weapons. But I have one condition. The chiefs exchanged glances. What could a village blacksmith possibly demand from 7 war leaders? I want apprentices, Kofi continued. Young people from each of your tribes sent here to learn not just metalworking, but the deeper lesson about treating others with dignity and respect. Let them work side by side, learning from each other as well as from me. Chief Dalila smiled broadly. You want to forge the next generation along with the spears. Exactly, Kofi replied. Metal can break, but ideas passed from teacher to student last forever. The symbolism was perfect. Young people from all 7 tribes working together in the same forge, learning the same lessons about patience, cooperation, and excellence. They would return to their home territories as living bridges between their peoples. It's settled then, declared Chief Anan. He raised his repaired spear high above his head. Let this be the moment we chose unity over division, cooperation over conflict. The other chiefs raised their own weapons in agreement. The sound that rose from the gathered crowds wasn't the war cry anyone had expected, but cheers of celebration and relief. Over the following days, the transformation was remarkable. Instead of battle preparations, the camps became workshops for cooperation. Warriors who had been ready to fight side by side now worked side by side to establish trade agreements, water-sharing protocols, and mutual defense pacts. The village of Adansi became a bustling center of activity, as representatives from all 7 tribes worked out the details of their new alliance. Kofi's forge burned day and night as he began work on the ceremonial spears, while young apprentices from each tribe started arriving to begin their training. Months later, when the 7 spears were finally completed, representatives from across the region came to witness their presentation. Each weapon was a masterpiece incorporating metals, techniques, and decorative elements from all 7 tribal traditions. But more impressive than the spears themselves were the young apprentices who had helped create them. The young people had formed friendships that crossed all tribal boundaries. They spoke each other's languages, understood each other's customs, and carried in their hearts the lesson that differences could be sources of strength rather than conflict. The ceremony marking the completion of the spears also marked the formal establishment of the 7 tribes alliance. Adansi was declared a permanent neutral zone and free trading post, protected by all 7 tribes working together. Years passed, and the village grew into a thriving city known throughout West Africa as the Forge of Peace. Travelers came from hundreds of miles away to see the place where enemies had become allies through the simple act of one man's kindness to a stranger. Kofi lived to see his daughter's wedding, where she wore silver jewelry made from the leftover metal from that first spear repair. He lived to see his apprentices become master craftsmen themselves, spreading the lessons of cooperation and respect throughout the region. But most of all, he lived to see that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can indeed change the world. One person at a time, the broken spear that had seemed like a simple repair job had ultimately mended something much greater, the relationships between peoples who had been enemies for generations. And it all started with a blacksmith who believed that honor meant helping others, regardless of whether they could pay.